Have you ever walked into a room and felt like it wasn't meant for you? Not because of the walls or the view, but because of who you were and who the world thought you weren't. Stella Whitmore had once built something of her own, a design firm shaped from long nights, frugal dreams, and a heart that never stopped believing until the economy collapsed. And with it, everything she thought defined her. Now, at 34, with fading savings and a past full of quiet ache, she steps into the polished world of a tech empire, one last interview, one final chance. Across from her sits Damian Holloway, CEO, self-made, brilliant, and more broken than anyone knows. What would you do if the very space that could save your future was owned by a man who just might unravel your past? Would you stay guarded or would you risk being seen? This is not a love story in the traditional sense. It's a story about choosing again, about building something real, not just between two people, but within yourself. Take a deep breath and come with us into the room where everything changes. If this speaks to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And now, let the story begin. The rain had come down steadily all morning, painting the city of Portland in shades of gray. It wasn't the kind of storm that howled or roared, it was gentler, more persistent, like a reminder that some things take time to wash away. Stella Whitmore stood just outside the entrance to Holloway Innovations, her umbrella turning inside out in the wind before she finally gave up and folded it closed. Rain clung to the edges of her coat, dripping slowly down onto her worn leather portfolio. She brushed a hand through her chestnut hair, now curling at the ends from the damp, and took a breath so deep it trembled in her chest. She had stood in front of glass doors like these before, clean mirrored surfaces reflecting her outline, one she wasn't always sure belonged to her anymore. Just last year, she was the owner of her own interior design firm. She had a modest office, a handful of loyal clients, and a growing reputation for designing spaces that felt like home, even in the middle of chaos. Then the economy dipped, a few projects stalled, and within 6 months, everything collapsed like a house of cards. 34. Broke. And standing in the rain for what might be her last real chance. She exhaled once more, then pushed open the door. The warmth inside hit her like a silent hug. A lobby of glass, steel, and stone stretched out before her, sleek, polished, and far more impressive than any office she'd worked in. The receptionist looked up briefly before returning to her screen. "Stella Whitmore. I'm here to see Mr. Holloway." "40th floor," the woman replied, motioning toward the elevator bay without a smile. The ride up was slow and silent. Stella watched her reflection in the elevator's stainless steel walls. She smoothed the lapel of her coat and pulled herself upright. The mirror showed her a woman who was holding it together. The voice inside her reminded her how fragile that hold really was. She had done her research. Damian Holloway, tech entrepreneur, self-made millionaire by 35, now 41, and still the sole CEO of his company. Interviews called him brilliant, ruthless, visionary, never married. She hadn't expected to be impressed by him. What she hadn't expected was how he would look at her. The elevator chimed at the 40th floor. The doors slid open to a quiet hallway dressed in deep wood panels and soft lighting. She stepped out slowly, following signs to the main executive office. The door was already slightly ajar. She knocked once. "Come in," said a voice low, calm, unmistakably composed. Inside, the space opened wide, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Portland's skyline. Everything was sharp: glass, steel, leather. Cold, beautiful, expensive. Damien Holloway stood near the window, back partially turned, phone to his ear. He was taller than she imagined. His charcoal gray suit looked like it belonged in a film. His hair, darker than in the photos online, was swept back cleanly, not a strand out of place. But it was when he turned that something shifted. His eyes landed on her and didn't move. Deep gray blue. Focused. Not staring out of arrogance, but of calculation. And something else, something quieter. Curiosity. Maybe a flicker of recognition, though they had never met. He ended the call. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, walking toward her with measured ease. "Thank you for coming in." His handshake was firm, not overly so, warm. Stella forced herself not to flinch under the weight of his gaze. "Thank you for seeing me," she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. He motioned to a seat across from his desk. She sat, adjusting her portfolio on her lap. "I've seen your work," he said, getting straight to the point. "It's impressive, subtle, but personal. You create spaces people want to stay in." She blinked. "That's the goal," she said softly. He leaned back in his chair. "You had your own firm, Whitmore Designs. What happened?" The question hit hard, but not unexpectedly. She had rehearsed the answer more times than she could count. The pandemic slowed things down. Then a few clients pulled out. I held on as long as I could, but it wasn't sustainable. I'm not ashamed of the work I did, just of how quickly it all slipped away. Damien didn't respond right away. He studied her, and for a moment, it felt like she wasn't being interviewed, she was being read, piece by piece. "You're here for a design project," he said. "But let me be clear, this isn't just another office renovation. I want something different. I want someone who sees more than lines and palettes." "What do you want to feel when you walk into your office?" she asked without hesitation. He seemed taken aback for half a second. Then he smiled. Just slightly. "Like I belong in it." She smiled too. Her first real one of the day. "That, Mr. Holloway, I can work with." As he looked at her across the sleek surface of the desk, something subtle shifted in the air. Not romantic. Not yet. But something undeniable. Something beginning. The morning after the interview, Stella Whitmore sat in her small apartment, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug she couldn't bring herself to throw away. The rain from yesterday had given way to soft light streaming through her window, the kind that made everything look a little more forgiving. She hadn't expected to hear anything for a few days, if at all. But at 8:06 a.m., her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Whitmore, this is Damien Holloway's office. Mr. Holloway would like to offer you the contract if you're available for a follow-up meeting this afternoon." Stella blinked. "Yes, of course. I'm available." The rest of the morning passed in a blur. She went over fabric catalogs, rechecked her notes from their conversation, and tried to ignore the nervous flutter in her stomach. When she arrived at Holloway Innovations again, it felt different, not easier, but less foreign. This time, Damien wasn't by the window. He was waiting just inside the door. "Stella," he said, using her first name as if they had already passed some unspoken threshold. "Come in." The room was just as polished, just as quiet, but something had shifted. There were 2 cups of coffee on the desk, one clearly untouched. He motioned toward it. "Black. No sugar." "I remember." She was surprised he'd noticed. "I didn't expect you to remember something like that." Damien tilted his head slightly. "I noticed the details. They matter." Stella sat down, both flattered and slightly on edge. She was used to clients being demanding, dismissive, distracted, but not attentive. I had a feeling you were going to say yes, he continued. There's something about the way you look at a space. You see the people who live in it, not just the furniture. She nodded slowly. I try to. I need this place to feel less like a fortress and more like a conversation. And I don't mean that in a poetic sense, he added, almost apologetically. I mean it literally. People walk in here and freeze. They see the numbers, the titles, the view, but not me. That admission came out softer than expected, vulnerable, human. What do you want them to see? She asked. Damien walked to the window, sliding his hands into his pockets. A man who built something out of nothing, who still doesn't quite know what to do with all of it. Stella looked around again. The office was pristine, but impersonal. High-end materials, sleek design, everything said power, but nothing said person. It could have belonged to any executive in any city. I think I understand, she said. You want this office to reflect who you are, not who people expect you to be. He turned to look at her. Exactly. That single word hung in the air longer than necessary. They spent the next hour going over plans. Stella took measurements, made sketches in her notebook, noted the light coming in from each direction. She knelt near the windows, checking where shadows fell at different times of day. Damien watched her move with quiet precision. She never rushed, never second-guessed herself. There was something grounded in the way she worked, like she carried her own center of gravity. I'll need about 6 to 8 weeks, she said finally. Depending on custom orders. That long, he teased, though his voice lacked any real impatience. Good things take time. Mr. Holloway. His smile was small but real. I think you're right. For a moment, silence settled between them again. Comfortable, but alert, like they were both aware that something else was forming, quietly. Beneath the professional facade, Stella stood, brushing her hands off on her blazer. I'll email you a full proposal tonight. Budget, timelines, initial concept. I'll look forward to it, he said, then paused. And Stella, she turned at the door. You don't have to call me Mr. Holloway. Damien's fine. She nodded once. All right then. Damien. She didn't miss the flicker in his eyes when she said his name. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Stella let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Later that evening, Damien sat alone in his office. The city lights flickered across the windows. He had spent so many nights here, pacing between thoughts, checking numbers, solving problems. But this evening felt different. Her sketches were still on his desk. One page had a small note scribbled in the corner, warmth, not just color, but feeling. He stared at those words longer than he should have. Victoria had once said his office was perfect. It looks like it belongs in a magazine, she'd told him. That was the problem. It looked like a life designed for admiration, not for living. He leaned back in his chair and looked out at the lights of Portland. Maybe. Just maybe. This wasn't only about an office. Maybe it was the first real change he had allowed in a long time. The following week arrived with early spring sunlight and a lingering chill in the Portland air, the kind of cold that clung to window panes long after the sky had turned blue again. Stella Whitmore carried 2 oversized boards under her arm and a rolled-up plan tucked into her satchel. She took the elevator straight to the 40th floor, her breath steady, her heart doing its usual dance. Damien Holloway was already there, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, as if trying not to look like the man his title demanded him to be. You're early, he said as she stepped into the office. I prefer the quiet before the storm, Stella replied. setting her boards down carefully against the wall. He watched her move, measured, thoughtful. There was something calming about her presence, like music you didn't notice until it stopped. "Tell me what you see," he asked, folding his arms, standing at a distance that felt respectful but attentive. Stella walked toward the center of the office, turning slowly, like a dancer reading a room before the first move. Her eyes scanned the sharp lines, high-gloss surfaces, and cool-tone textures. Nothing was inherently wrong, but everything was impersonal. "I see a space that was designed to impress," she said finally, "but not to belong." Damien blinked. "Go on. You've built a company from the ground up. Innovation, bold moves, calculated risk, that's your story. But this office," she glanced around, "it's playing it safe. This could be anyone's corner office in any high-rise. You've earned something more honest." Damien didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the window and leaned his hand against the glass, looking down at the city far below. "I've always thought being unremarkable was a kind of armor." Stella moved beside him, careful not to intrude, but close enough for her voice to soften naturally. "It can be. But it's also lonely." The silence between them wasn't awkward. It stretched with meaning, not absence. When he finally turned to face her, there was something different in his eyes. Not admiration, not flirtation, but recognition. "I want it to feel different," he said. "I want to feel different." "Then let's start here," she replied, motioning toward the center of the room, the center of gravity. "We shift that. We shift everything." That day, they worked side by side. Stella pinned fabric samples on the walls, tested natural lighting with warm filters, arranged mock furniture layouts, using masking tape on the floor. Damien didn't hover, but he didn't disappear, either. He asked questions, offered opinions, and listened. Truly listened to her reasoning behind every detail. By late afternoon, the office was scattered with swatches, sketches, and color wheels. Stella had removed her heels, standing barefoot on the hardwood floor, stretching her arms above her head after a long measure and mock-up. Damien leaned in the doorway, watching her. "You do this like it's a kind of language." "It is," she replied, not turning around. "Spaces speak, some whisper, some scream, some beg to be heard. Do you think mine is begging?" She smiled, still facing away. "No, yours is waiting, and a little bit afraid of what it might say." When she finally turned back toward him, he wasn't smiling, but he wasn't guarded either. "I haven't had anyone say that to me," he said quietly. "Not in years." "Then maybe," she said, stepping forward, "you've had the wrong people around you." Damien stared at her then, not because she was beautiful, though she was, not because she was talented, though he'd already seen that, but because she saw him not the CEO, not the polished man in the magazine features, just him. The weight of that seeing made his voice lower, softer. "How long have you been doing this, designing?" "Since I was 11. I rearranged my mom's living room every time she left for work. She came home once to find the sofa in the kitchen." He chuckled, and it was the kind of laugh that hadn't come easily to him in a long time. "What did she say?" She said, "At least now I can eat and nap at the same time." She was a nurse, exhausted all the time, but she always let me create. "That explains the warmth in your work. It explains the need for it," Stella said. "I learned early that sometimes the only safe place you have is the one you make for yourself." Something in Damien's face shifted again, something almost like pain. "My father left when I was 12, he said almost absently. Left us with debt and a house we couldn't keep. I swore I'd never be powerless again. So I built and built, and somewhere along the way, his voice trailed off. You forgot to make space for the boy who lost his home. He nodded once, eyes fixed on a point somewhere past the window. They stood there a long while, not speaking, not needing to. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't professional. It was human. That night, Stella stood barefoot in her kitchen, stirring a pot of soup on the stove. Her sister, Nah, called just as she was adding basil. So how's Mr. Million-Dollar View complicated? Stella said, a slow smile in her voice. But real. Surprisingly, real. Don't fall for him. I'm not. You sound like you are. I'm just seeing something in someone I didn't expect to. Nah was quiet for a moment. Just be careful. Okay, real doesn't always mean safe. I know. But as she sat down with her soup, flipping through her sketches of the office, she couldn't help but feel, for the first time in months, like she was home, even if it wasn't hers. The days that followed blurred into late evenings filled with fabric samples, furniture mock-ups, and endless decisions. Stella Whitmore found herself spending more time at Holloway Innovations than in her own apartment. The project had grown both in scale and in something unspoken. Each morning, she arrived early with a fresh cup of black coffee for herself, and a second one just in case for Damien Holloway. Sometimes he drank it, sometimes he didn't, but he always noticed. The office space began to shift, slowly, then all at once. The cold glass walls softened with natural textiles. Wooden accents replaced chrome. The sterile blue tones gave way to warm grays and earth colors. The panoramic view outside started to reflect something inside. Damien's presence became more constant, more deliberate. "You're here late again," he said one evening, stepping into the room just as Stella was kneeling on the floor, rearranging fabric swatches beneath a warm-toned lamp. "The light changes at this hour," she explained, glancing up at him. "I need to see how the colors play off each other." He walked closer, his sleeves rolled back, tie gone. There was something about the way the fading light hit his face that made him look less CEO, more man. His voice was gentler than usual. "Show me." She handed him a deep olive green sample, her fingers brushing his. The contact was brief, accidental, but it lit a quiet spark under her skin. He studied the fabric, but his eyes didn't stay there long. They flicked back to her face, lingering a second too long. "This one," she said, gesturing to a cooler beige, "would go behind your desk. It draws attention without shouting. You want to feel powerful, but not unapproachable." He nodded, but didn't speak. Damien. His name came out quieter than she intended. "I've never had anyone design a space like this for me," he said. "Every office I've had was built around what people expected to see, not what I needed." Stella stood, brushing her knees. She was closer to him now than she'd ever been. "People underestimate the emotional weight of space," she said. "How it reflects what we allow ourselves to feel." His eyes locked on hers. "And what if we feel something we shouldn't?" There it was, the line neither of them had dared cross until now. Her breath caught. "I work professionally with all my clients," she said, her voice calm but unsure. "It's important to keep things clear." Damien didn't move. He didn't push, but his voice dropped just enough to send a different kind of shiver down her spine. "Then why does it feel like this is anything but clear?" Stella stepped back, gently but firmly, placing the fabric samples back on the table. "I think I need to go for tonight," she said. "I'll finish the swatch review from home." Stella. But she was already moving. collecting her bag, her phone, her sense of control. She didn't look back until the elevator doors closed in front of her. That night, she sat curled up on her couch, staring at the swatches laid out across her coffee table, none of them making sense anymore. Na walked in from the kitchen, holding a half-eaten apple and raising an eyebrow. Let me guess. He looked at you like you're a person, and now you're spiraling. Stella gave her a dry look. It's not that simple. Of course it's not. He's your client. You need the job, and you're scared to feel something real when you've just gotten your life back on track. I'm not scared, Stella said, a little too quickly. Na sat down next to her. Yes, you are. You're scared because he's not just handsome. He's seen you, and you've seen him. And once you see someone, you can't unsee them. Stella closed her eyes. She remembered the way Damien looked at her, not with desire alone, but with understanding, recognition. That was what terrified her most. She had built walls, carefully, brick by careful brick, after watching everything she believed in fall apart. And now, here was this man steady, composed, vulnerable in unexpected ways, knocking on those walls without even meaning to. I can't afford to mess this up, she said. I need the contract. I need stability. You need to feel safe. Na finished gently. But maybe safe isn't the same as real. The next day, Stella kept her distance. She arrived at the office, worked efficiently, spoke only when necessary. Damien noticed but said nothing. At noon, he passed her desk with a nod, heading toward a meeting. She didn't see him again until late afternoon, when he returned to find the new accent chairs arranged perfectly near the windows. Stella stood nearby, clipboard in hand, posture straight. They're perfect, he said, walking over slowly, warm, structured, understated. She nodded once. That was the intent. Damien hesitated. Then, softly, have I made things harder for you? Her eyes met his. She didn't answer right away. Yes, she said finally, but not in the way you think. He looked like he might say more, but didn't. Instead, he walked over to the window and stood in silence, watching the city shift under the falling light. Behind him, Stella quietly returned to work. Both of them stayed there for a long while, two people standing at the edge of something neither one dared name. 2 weeks into the redesign project, the transformation was undeniable. Damien Holloway's office no longer felt like a glass tower overlooking Portland. It felt like a place with breath and memory, like someone had finally cracked open a window to let real life in. That Friday, as the last delivery crew left with empty boxes and polished tools, Damien approached Stella with a small, uncertain smile. Let me take you to lunch, it was said casually, almost as if he were suggesting a walk around the block. She hesitated. It's just lunch, he added, reading the conflict on her face. I suppose we do need to discuss next steps, she replied, trying not to overthink what her heart had already accepted. The restaurant was quiet, nestled inside an old brick building in the Pearl District, all reclaimed wood and hanging Edison bulbs, the kind of place where no one raised their voice, and every glass clink sounded meaningful. They sat at a corner table with a view of the rain-speckled sidewalk. For a while, they talked only of colors, materials, project milestones, but slowly, the conversation drifted into deeper waters. Tell me about you, Damien said after their meals were cleared. Not the portfolio version. The person version. Stella laughed lightly. That version's still under construction. Aren't we all? She told him about her hometown in upstate New York, about how her mother raised 2 daughters on a nurse's salary. about the way she used to turn shoeboxes into doll houses with wallpaper made from magazine pages, about the first time a client cried walking into a room she had designed and how that moment meant more to her than any five-star review. Damien listened without interruption, his fingers gently tracing the rim of his water glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. I started this company because I was tired of being invisible. Poor kid with a single mom and second-hand shoes. I thought if I built something big enough, no one would look past me anymore. Stella met his gaze, and in that moment, they weren't client and contractor. They were just two people who had fought to become more than what life had once handed them. The moment was soft, real, and then it was shattered. Well, Damien Holloway, having lunch with his decorator. How domestic. The voice sliced through the room like cold metal. Stella turned to see a tall woman in a cream blazer, her posture regal, her tone dripping with familiarity. Her hair was sleek, her heels sharper than necessary, and her smile had no warmth. Victoria Langford. Damien stood slowly. Victoria. What are you doing here? Meeting a client, she said, eyes fixed on Stella, though it seems I'm late to the real event. Stella's breath tightened. She didn't belong here, not in this conversation, not in this world. Victoria, this is Stella Whitmore, Damien said. His voice clipped. She's redesigning my office. How lovely, Victoria said, extending a hand she didn't expect Stella to shake. I'm sure you're very good. With your hands. Stella flushed, but held her expression steady. She rose gracefully from her seat, gathering her purse with a quiet dignity. Thank you for lunch. Mr. Holloway, she said evenly. I should get back. The accent wall installation is scheduled for this afternoon. Damien stepped forward. Stella. Wait, it's fine, she said, not looking at him. I'll send over the revised layout tonight. She walked out without once turning around, back at the office. Stella moved like a woman possessed. She directed the workers, measured 3 times before each drill, and ignored the buzzing of her phone. She could still hear Victoria's voice echoing in her mind, that cruel familiarity like she already knew how this story would end. She wasn't wrong. Stella knew exactly what people like Victoria saw when they looked at her. An outsider, a temporary fascination, a storyline that wouldn't last. And what scared her most was how much that possibility hurt. Damien didn't return until evening. The office was quiet, newly arranged, with soft lighting casting shadows against textured walls. Stella was kneeling near the bookshelf, aligning the final set of ceramic vases. She didn't look up when he entered. Stella, do you always take your exes to the places you bring your designers? She asked, her voice neutral but pointed. He flinched. That wasn't how it was. Doesn't matter. Yes, it does. She stood, finally facing him. You said you wanted a space that reflected who you are, she said, but I don't think you know who that is yet. Damien's jaw tightened. I know I'm not the man she made me out to be. Then why did you let her talk to me like that? Silence. I've worked too hard to be dismissed, she continued, her voice cracking slightly. And I won't be your maybe in front of a woman who already decided I'm not enough. I didn't mean to put you in that position, he said quietly. I didn't expect her to show up, but you didn't stop her either. Damien looked at her, really looked at her, and for once, he didn't have the right words. I need this job, she said, voice low, but I won't stay where I'm not respected. She gathered her sketches and samples, her shoulders squared, her breath even. Good night. Mr. Holloway? Then she walked out again, not with drama, but with dignity. and this time, he let her go. But his heart didn't. The office felt hollow without her. It wasn't the lighting or the layout. The textures were still warm, the chairs still perfectly aligned, the artwork still hung with quiet intention, but Stella Whitmore was gone, and somehow, everything that once felt inviting now seemed to echo. Damien Holloway stood by the window, staring out at a city that kept moving whether he understood it or not. Portland had a way of softening noise, of making even the hardest days feel less permanent. But today, nothing softened. 3 days had passed since the lunch with Victoria. 3 days since Stella walked out of his office without raising her voice, without looking back. And somehow, that silence screamed louder than any argument he'd ever had. He tried to bury himself in work. The executive team had budget reviews, product launches, a new security vendor meeting. He sat through every one of them, nodding in all the right places, answering questions with robotic clarity. But something in him was fraying at the edges. James Porter, his longtime friend and COO, noticed it first. "You look like you haven't slept," James said during their Friday morning briefing. "Didn't feel like it," Damien replied. Flipping through a report, James hesitated. "This wouldn't have anything to do with the woman redesigning your office, would it?" Damien didn't answer right away. James continued, gentler now. "Victoria's little performance the other day, word got around. Half the staff felt it from 10 floors down." Damien set the report aside. "She humiliated her," he said flatly, "and I let it happen." James leaned back in his chair, watching his friend unravel for the first time in years. "You didn't stop it. That's different, but also worse." Damien's jaw clenched. "I've spent so much of my life trying to be in control," he muttered. "Every move, every word, every partnership calculated. But when it mattered, when she needed me to stand up, I froze. Because you were afraid of what it would cost." "Yes." James nodded, understanding more than he let on. "You built this company with your name and your silence. But maybe it's time to build something with your voice." That night, Damien didn't go home. He stayed at the office long after everyone else had left, the building humming with electricity and emptiness. He walked the halls she had walked, touched the backs of chairs she had chosen, let his hand run along the edge of the desk she had shifted by 2 inches because it felt better that way. He sat on the new leather sofa, the one she fought to include, despite his hesitation. It was soft but structured, just like her. Then he opened the drawer of his desk and pulled out the sketch she had left behind. A simple pencil rendering of his office, but this version had light pouring in, laughter drawn in soft lines, and a small note in the corner. "Every space has a heart. This one just needs permission to beat." He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel regret, not just professional discomfort, but human regret, elsewhere in the city. Stella sat curled in a chair by her apartment window, wrapped in an oversized cardigan, a cup of tea in her hands. Na watched her from the kitchen. "You haven't said a word about him in 2 days," she said. "I'm trying not to," Stella replied, her voice tired. Na pulled up a stool beside her. "So what's louder, missing him? Or being mad at him?" Stella didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on a spot in the distance, a rooftop maybe, or a memory. "I knew it would be complicated," she whispered, "but I didn't expect to feel erased." "You weren't," Na said gently. "You were just inconvenient to someone who doesn't know what real looks like." "But Damien does," Stella murmured. Na looked at her. "So are you angry because of what Victoria said or because of what he didn't?" "Both," Stella thought, "but mostly Because I wanted him to choose me, out loud, without shame, and he didn't. The next morning, Stella returned to Holloway Innovations one final time to complete her contractual obligation. She oversaw the delivery of the last few pieces, adjusted lighting angles, double-checked the final invoice. Damien wasn't there. She left the keys, the documentation, and a small note. The project is complete. Thank you for trusting me. No signature, no farewell, just closure. Or so she thought. That evening, James called her. I'm not supposed to do this, he said. But you should know Damien fired Victoria's PR firm publicly. Also canceled a board meeting because they wanted to review his personal conduct. Stella's breath caught, and he told them all, my integrity is not up for negotiation, neither is hers. Her heart pounded. Why are you telling me this? Because the man hasn't smiled in 3 days, and because some people are worth a second look, even after they've screwed up. She didn't respond, but that night, she pulled out her original sketches, the ones she almost threw away, and she didn't cry. She just waited. Saturday evening settled over Portland with the sky painted in watercolor purples and soft gray. The city lights began to flicker on, one building at a time, tiny declarations of life against the coming dark. Stella Whitmore stood at her apartment window, arms folded over her chest, her tea forgotten and cold beside her. She wasn't looking at anything in particular. Just the skyline she'd come to know, just the silence she hadn't asked for. Her phone buzzed on the table. Na called out from the kitchen. You gonna get that? No, Stella replied quietly, not turning. Then it buzzed again. This time, a message from an unknown number, just a photo. The building across from hers, Holloway Innovations, the top floors, all lit, but not random. The lights spelled out something across the 40th floor windows. Stella, I'm sorry. She stared. She blinked. She whispered, What? The phone rang again. Damien's name. She didn't answer, but she didn't hang up either. She just let it ring until the voicemail clicked in. And then came the text. Please just give me 5 minutes. I'm downstairs. She looked down from the window. There he was, standing on the sidewalk, hands in the pockets of his coat, hair slightly disheveled from the wind. He looked up at her window like a man who had already accepted she might never come down. And maybe that was why she did. 10 minutes later, she opened the lobby door to find him still standing there, a massive bouquet of wildflowers in one hand, sunflowers, eucalyptus, and peonies, nothing overly arranged, just like her. The other hand held nothing but stillness. I didn't want to knock, he said, voice low. In case you needed space. I still do, she replied. But I also needed to know if you meant any of it. I do, he said simply. Then, quieter. And I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner. They walked in silence up to her apartment. She let him in without words, motioning him toward the couch she had thrifted 3 years ago and still loved more than anything new. He sat, awkward in a way she'd never seen him before. Not the man who dominated boardrooms, just Damien, tired, humbled, waiting. I let you walk away, he said, eyes on his own hands, because I thought silence was safer than confrontation. But all I did was prove Victoria right and betray the one person who saw me clearly. She stayed by the doorway, arms crossed, heart pounding. You let her speak for you, she said, and you let me feel small. I know. She waited. He looked up. I don't care what people say anymore, what the board thinks, what the press spins. The only thing I truly care about, is that, when you walked out, The building didn't feel like mine anymore. Stella stepped forward. "Words are easy," she said. "But that message in the windows, that wasn't easy," he said, trying to smile. "The facilities team thinks I've lost my mind." She laughed softly, then covered her mouth. "I couldn't sleep," Damien continued. "So I stood in that office, the one you brought to life, and I asked myself what I would do if I had one last shot, one honest chance to say something without filters, without strategy. And that's what I came up with. Big gesture," she said, folding her arms again. "Won't fix everything. I know. But I didn't come to fix. I came to ask." She looked at him, eyes narrowed slightly. Not angry now, just guarded. "Ask what." He rose slowly from the couch. "Ask if there's still a space for me. Not just in your work, but in your life." The room fell silent again. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, something fragile hung in the air. "I don't want to be your apology," she said. "I want to be your choice." Damien stepped closer. "You were never anything less. They didn't kiss. They didn't rush. Instead, she reached out and he took her hand. And in that simple contact, something old cracked open, and something new began to form. That night, Damien didn't stay. They parted at the door, but the flowers stayed on her kitchen counter. And when she turned off the lights, she looked out the window one more time. The message was still there. And this time, she smiled. Sunday morning brought a kind of quiet Portland rarely offered. No wind, no rain, just stillness. The city felt paused, as if waiting for something to begin. Stella Whitmore sat at her dining table, coffee in hand, blueprints rolled out in front of her, not just the plans for the executive floor, but her personal project list. Things she had put on hold: a kitchen redesign for a friend, a pro bono community center in the Northeast District, her future. The knock on the door came soft and careful. She knew it was him. When she opened it, Damien Holloway stood there. No flowers this time, no grand gesture, just a man holding a box of donuts, a thermos of coffee, and a look that asked permission. "You said words are easy," he said, "so I brought breakfast." She stepped aside, letting him in. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't romantic. It was honest. They sat across from each other, the box open between them, hands occasionally reaching for the same donut, laughing once when their fingers touched. For a while, they talked about safe things, new product designs, art installations, weather. Then, when the coffee had gone cold, Stella asked the question she'd been holding. "What changed?" Damien leaned back slightly, thoughtful. "I stopped measuring love by how well it fit into my life." She looked at him, and started asking if I was building a life I actually wanted. He took a breath. "I realized I'd created this empire to feel seen. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing anyone else, especially the people who mattered most." Stella stared down at the blueprint in front of her. "I spent so much time fighting to prove I could do it alone. I forgot that wanting someone doesn't make you weak. Needing someone doesn't either," he added quietly. Their eyes met again. Neither of them looked away. Later that day, they walked the downtown streets, just the two of them. No agenda, no staff, no meetings. Stella showed Damien her favorite bookstore, tucked between a music shop and a flower stand. He bought her a copy of a design book she'd once mentioned in passing. She didn't say thank you. She just smiled, and he knew that meant more. They ended the afternoon sitting on a park bench overlooking the river, the wind picking up just enough to carry the smell of pine and old brick. I'm not asking you to forget what happened, Damien said, or to trust me right away. I don't need you to be perfect, Stella replied. I just need you to be real. And stay. I can do that. She nodded, but said nothing more. The river kept flowing. The following week, Stella returned to Holloway Innovations not as a contractor, but as a collaborator. Damien had offered her the lead role in redesigning the entire executive floor. She had hesitated, not because she doubted her skills, but because she didn't want her work to be defined by their personal story, until Damien said the words that mattered most. I want your vision not because I care about the brand, but because I care about building something that makes people feel like they belong. You taught me that. She accepted. But this time, she set boundaries, a clear contract, defined roles, time off that didn't involve business lunches turning into emotional landmines. Damien respected every line she drew, and little by little, they began creating something new, not a perfect love story, but a blueprint. One afternoon, as they reviewed color palettes in the sunlight-drenched new break room, Stella turned to him. Do you ever think we met too soon? She asked. Damien looked at her, thoughtful. No, he said. I think we met right on time. We just had to grow into who we needed to be. She didn't reply. She just leaned her shoulder gently against his. And for the first time, he leaned back. They didn't move in together. They didn't announce anything. They didn't need to. Because what they were building couldn't be captured in press releases or social posts. It lived in quiet moments, in long glances across design layouts, in late-night texts about tile patterns and childhood fears. It lived in respect, in presence, in promise. One evening, as Stella locked up her office, Damien waited for her by the elevator. He held something behind his back. When the doors opened, he handed her a small velvet box. No, not that, he said, laughing at her raised brow. It's not a ring. Inside was a pendant, a small compass. Silver, simple, elegant. Wherever this life takes us, he said, I want you to always know my heart points back to you. She didn't cry. She just reached up, fastened it around her neck, and whispered, Then I'll wear it every day. 6 months later, the office on the 40th floor of Holloway Innovations no longer resembled the sterile space Stella had first walked into. It breathed. It welcomed. The walls, once steel gray, now held warm tones of stone and linen. Light streamed through the angled windows in ways that made every object look intentional. There were plants not the fake kind, but living greens that softened the edges. On the far side of the room hung a black and white photograph of an old, crumbling house on a hill. Beneath it, in simple script, was the caption, Even broken places can shelter hope. It had been Stella's gift. She stood there now, fingers tracing the curve of the frame, remembering the day she found it at a vintage shop by the river. Damien had told her once that his childhood home had fallen apart long before the mortgage did. The photo reminded him, he said later, that things can break and still matter. He understood that now. Across the room, Damien entered with 2 mugs of coffee, one black, one with a splash of cream and too much cinnamon, just the way Stella liked it. He set hers on the desk beside her. You ready? He asked. She turned to him with a half smile. As I'll ever be. They were hosting a small gathering that afternoon, just their team, a few close colleagues, and a quiet unveiling of the completed executive floor redesign. No press, no staged ribbon cutting, just people who had believed in the project when it was still only sketches and possibilities. As the room began to fill with soft chatter and the sound of footsteps over reclaimed oak, Stella felt something settle in her chest. Not excitement, not pride, peace. Later, after the last guest left and the office fell quiet again, Damien closed the door behind him and leaned against it, watching her. "You made this place feel like home," he said softly. Stella turned from the window. "You let it." He crossed the room, taking her hands in his. "I spent so long building walls. Around this company, around myself, around everything that might have been too real to control. And now," she asked. "Now," he said, "I want to build differently." She smiled. "With windows." He laughed gently, nodding, and doors, wide open. They walked the floor one last time that evening. Lights dimmed, city stretching out beyond the glass. In one corner office, Stella paused and looked at him. "You know what I've realized?" she said. "What's that? We never needed to fall in love to make this place beautiful." He nodded slowly. "But we did. And that made all the difference." By spring, Stella's name appeared on the door next to Damien's. Whitmore and Holloway. Design plus development. They weren't just partners in renovation anymore. They were partners in direction, in vision, in choosing each other every day. They kept separate apartments for a while by choice, not fear, because they'd learned that love doesn't erase who you are. It makes room for both stories to unfold, side by side. And when Stella finally moved into Damien's restored craftsman home, complete with an attic-turned design studio and a tiny garden in the back, she brought very little with her. Just her books, her tea kettle, and the pendant he'd given her that still sat at the center of her chest like a compass, always pointing home. One evening, as they curled on the sofa, a spring rain tapping at the windows, Damien reached for her hand. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Okay? I love the life we're building." "I do too," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "But if we lost all of it tomorrow," he continued, "the offices, the projects, the name on the door, I'd still have everything I need. Because I'd have you." Stella looked up, eyes misted but steady. "Then, let's never build anything that costs us each other." He kissed her forehead. "Deal." Some love stories come with fireworks, sweeping music, grand endings. But this one didn't end. It simply kept going, one room at a time. Some spaces in life aren't made for us. But sometimes, that's only because we haven't made room for ourselves. This story isn't just about love, it's about belonging, about losing what once defined you, and learning to build again not with urgency, but with grace. As we grow older, the world often expects us to have it all figured out. But maybe the truth is simpler. We're all still learning how to choose better people, places, even ourselves. Damien and Stella teach us something powerful. It's never too late to start again, not from scratch, but from experience, to make peace with the past, to soften the sharpness of survival, to welcome love, not as rescue, but as companionship. So if you're standing at a crossroads today, unsure of your next step, know this. It's okay to rebuild. It's okay to choose differently. And it's more than okay to make room for something beautiful even now. Thank you for spending your time with us, for listening with an open heart. If this story touched something quiet inside you, a memory, a feeling, a hope, we'd be so grateful if you'd help it reach someone else who might need it too. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, because sometimes a story is all it takes to bring someone back to themselves